In 1978, when disco was on top,
I'm making it.
these guys partied to a different beat.
No more, no more.
Hours from now, we're actually gonna be seeing Kiss, baby!
Don't you know what KISS stands for? Knights in Satan's Service.
We just watched Jam's mom torch our Kiss tickets.
Nobody's missing that concert tomorrow night.
We're not stealing my mom's car.
Damn right we are.
The night is young, filled with possibilities.
Beth?
Yes?
Hey, you little twerps. Give me your Kiss tickets or I'll pop your faces in.
KISS sucks!
You're the coolest.
Detroit Rock City.
It's a girl walking along the side of the highway. We should pull over and help her out. I mean, they make scary movies that start out like that.
Hey, but they make porno movies that start out like that too, man.
And welcome to the Cult Cinema Circle podcast. My name is Jesse, and I will be your host. So on today's episode, we're going to head out to Detroit to go and see our favorite band, Kiss. But we are going to also have some obstacles along the way, But you know what? We're going to learn. It's all about friendship and sticking together and obviously rocking out. So today, if you couldn't already read, we're going to be covering a little movie from 1999 called Detroit Rock City. Now, my history with this movie is I don't have one. I didn't even really know what this movie was for the longest time until probably maybe a year and a half ago or a year or something ago, where I listened to the podcast This Ends at Prom with Harmony and BJ Colangelo, and on their Patreon they do Sadie Hawkins Dance episodes where they cover boy-centered movies, and on the main feed they do teen girl movies. And obviously this is like a teen boy movie, I guess you would say, and they covered it, and I throw them money every so often to be like, ooh, let me look at some bonus content, and they covered this. I need to go re-listen to their episode about it, but that's probably when I first was like, wait, what is this movie? But then also finding out that it's like, oh, that has like Melanie Linsky in it, and also like Natasha Lyonne's there, and like, I like those actresses, and I was like, oh wait, no, Edward Furlong's in it, and also like the kid from Not Another Teen Movie ? I was like, what is this? But I also came to it and looked it up a little bit, and I also was like, oh, it would be great to do on the show because it is celebrating 25 years since being out, and also it kind of is this like cult movie in a way, and it would just be right for me to talk about and to go over on this very show you're listening to. So but yeah, and I actually just watched it on Hoopla, so again, I will always sing the praises of Hoopla and Canopy. Go get your library cards, see if your local library participates in these services, and go watch these things ad free. It's amazing. Like, oh my god, it's so good. Anyway, so as we normally do on the show, we're going to go into a little bit about just the facts and figures of this movie, a little bit of context, and going over the plot and all that fun stuff. But, without further ado, let's move on. So the facts and the figures of this movie, we have Detroit Rock City. This was released August 13th of 1999, and it comes in at 94 minutes. This is a New Line Cinema picture, and it was also budgeted at $17 million. And this came in opening weekend ranking gross was 13. It was at 13 with $2 million made its first weekend. And overall, I believe it only made about 4.2 million. So needless to say, this was a financial flop, of course. And then critically, we are looking at a 50% from critics with about 42 reviews, and then a 82% audience score with about 50,000 ratings. So Needless to say, I guess the Kiss Army has come out and taken this movie and really loved it. And on Letterboxd, it's actually sitting at a 3.4 out of 5. It only has, from what I remember, maybe like 2,000 or 3,000 reviews. So it's not like it was a bunch of people. Let me look real quick, actually, just to see how many people actually like viewed it on there. Let me take a look real quick. Oh my gosh. So it looks like in terms of actually viewing it, it's been viewed by about 35,000 members, but only has 2.9 thousand like reviews. So that's interesting. You know, maybe a little bit of a lesser known or lesser viewed film, perhaps. So that's kind of interesting to think about. But then we have our cast and our crew of this film. We'll get to that in just a little bit. So wanted to tell you that. But I think it's sort of important, though, to kind of set the context of what the setting and the time period of this movie is. So, you know, to give that 1970s, you know, cultural context. So this film is set in 1978 specifically. And the reason it is so significant in a way is really because this is when Kiss was really at kind of the height of popularity that they had. They were actually on tour at this time. Kind of the same as like the tour that's in the movie a little bit, but we're also looking at just like the late 70s. And of course, something like, you know, Dazed and Confused kind of looks at it from 1976, right? And so this is also around that same time, just a little bit later. This is right before we get into the 80s, right before we get into Reagan and, you know, his presidency and all that. So I think it's important to kind of look at this different part of that. And I just think it's interesting. And also just kind of the cultural and musical background of the late 70s. So, of course, you just see that in Kiss being a big part of that. You also just see a lot more. You have disco, which had already hit at this point and is a part of this movie as well, with the character of Natasha Lyonne. It's interesting to kind of look at this because, again, everything's going to change in the 80s. So, you know, you still have people like Kiss, you have like REO Speedwagon, and like you have like Fleetwood Mac and all these different people who are kind of in their heyday. And then you end up having in the 80s, it's completely different. And music is about to go through a huge change, really. So I think it's interesting to kind of look at this and see that this really is a period piece and, you know, that kind of context. Plus, there was also just a lot going on. You know, this is pre the AIDS crisis. This is before, you know, the war on drugs, really. You know, and it's just very interesting to kind of look at this and to see what's really, you know, going on. And so, yeah, I think that's just kind of interesting. And back to, I wanted to kind of just talk about that real quick because I think it's important to kind of set that context. And I'm not going to go too deep into like who Kiss is, but basic idea you need to know is that they are a band that was first made in the early 70s by Gene Simmons and I think Paul Stanley, I believe, got together, and then they ended up getting together with the other two members of the band at that point. And well, they decided to don on some makeup and they had these really catchy songs. You can kind of go into all that and you do your own research with that. I'll go a little bit more into what I could just find out about the production and kind of go into that once we get to production history. But yeah, that's all you really need to know about Kiss. They were a big band in the 70s, and then in the 80s they ended up breaking up for a little bit. And then around the time of this movie, that's when there was this renewed interest in the band of Kiss. They were actually getting back together. They were doing a reunion type tour type thing. So that's kind of why this made sense to do, especially in the late 90s. Let's move into our cast and our crew, though. So we have our director is Adam Rifkin. He's done a couple different movies. Big ones you need to know are The Last Movie Star. He was also one of the directors of Chillerama, which is a movie I didn't really like that much, to be honest with you, but I do like Adam Green and Joe Lynch. So I decided to at least give them a little bit of a, you know, I gave him a watch, but unfortunately I didn't really like the movie overall. But he is also one of the guys who directed in that film. So that's kind of interesting how that worked. And then we also have our writer, who is Carl V. Dupree. He actually also wrote Hellraiser Hellworld, which is the one where Hellraiser and the Cenobites are in the internet. I guess it's really just Pinhead who's there, but he wrote that masterpiece, obviously. We have the composer, who is J. Peter Robinson. He is also the composer of Wayne's World and Encino Man, and a couple of different credits as well. It's kind of stacked in a way. It's kind of crazy how much he actually did. Let me look at that real quick. Yeah, J. Peter Robinson, he also did New Nightmares music. He did Vampire in Brooklyn, also did Return to the Living Dead Part 2, a couple different things. So it's really interesting. He also did Brink, the music for Brink, the DCOM. I think that's kind of fun. That's kind of cool. Yeah, so that's kind of what he did pretty much. Interesting. Then we have our cinematographer, John R. Leonetti. He is the same cinematographer who did The Mask and also The Conjuring as well, the first movie of that, which it just shows. And I think this movie is shot pretty decently. He also ended up doing Dead Silence. He did Piranha 3D, I believe. He also did in both the Insidious movies. He also did Mortal Kombat as well. But he also did such gems as I Know Who Killed Me, and also Joe Dirt, and also The Woods from Lucky McKee. So he also ended up doing that. We then also have our dual editing. We have Mark Goldblatt and also Peter Schenck. So Goldblatt, he actually edited Showgirls, iconic, and also Halloween 2, the sequel to Halloween, of course. And then Peter Schenck also comes into the story a little bit later, but he also was one of the editors, and I just talked about it last week when I was talking about Mystery Men, that actually Peter Schenck was one of the people who edited Barbed Wire. So it always comes back to Barbed Wire on here, which is just funny to me. But yeah, so that is a little bit about our crew. And if there's anybody else to kind of point out, if anything, we have Rosanna Norton, who actually, I think I've talked about on the show before. She's iconic. She is the costumer for Carrie, Phantom of the Paradise, the Flintstones, the Brady Bunch movie. So she's the same person who did this movie, which I thought was really cool. Yeah, and of course, we have to also talk a little bit about just the fact of the producers of this movie. So you do have Barry Levin and Gene Simmons, who's one of the directors, and also Tim Sullivan. And they all kind of work into this story together, which is interesting. So we have that. And then we talk a little bit about our cast of characters. So the cast of characters, we have Edward Furlong, who's playing Hawk. So he is, of course, from Pecker. He's from Terminator 2, I believe, is what he did. But he has also gone on and had American History X. He was also in that movie. He was in the remake of Night of the Demons from 2009, I believe. So, he's had a life. But he was in this movie. I thought he was really good in this movie, actually. We then also have Giuseppe Andrews, who plays Lex in this movie. So he is also from American History X as well. But he was also in Independence Day. He was in Pleasantville. He played a small role in Never Been Kissed. He was also in both movies for Cabin Fever 1, and then also the sequel. He plays the weird sheriff guy. He also a director as well of his own movies, and he has actually been out of the public eye since 2015. So he has not been presumed dead, I guess, which is, I guess, good. But yeah, Giuseppe Andrews, where are you at? Let us know, I guess. But yeah, he's also in this. James DeBello is also in this film. He played a small role in American Pie as enthusiastic guy, but he is also from Cabin Fever as well. He played Bert in that movie, that whole asshole who says that squirrels are gay, and that's why he's shooting them. So that's fun. But he is in this movie as Trip, and he's the one with the long hair. And then who my favorite is, because this really is an ensemble piece. So all four of these guys are really the main leads of the movie, but I do love Sam Huntington in this movie. He is the aforementioned guy from Not Another Teen Movie, where he's pretty much the Chris Klein character from Election, and not Election, but I guess he's the Chris Klein character from American Pie. But he is I just really like him. He's also the kid from Jungle to Jungle, if you didn't didn't already know that. He's like the little boy from that, which is kind of interesting. So he was also in like Sleepover. He was in like a couple of Superman movies. He was in like a Superman movie here and there, which is interesting. But I think most people would know him for being in Not Another Teen Movie, which I think he was fantastic in personally. And then some of the other people that are in here, we have Lynn Shay, of course, sister to Robert Shay, who is the guy who literally helped create New Line. So, of course, she's in this film. But I love Lynn Shay. I was just thinking about that when I was watching some of the behind-the-scenes stuff of this film that you can find on YouTube. And she was interviewed a little bit. And it's just really cool to see her. And, of course, she's like from the Insidious movies as well. She's a part of those as well. But, like, I just really, I fucks with her. I like her. Then you have some of the other females of this movie. So you have Melanie Linsky. We've talked about Melanie before on this podcast. She's from But I'm a Cheerleader, Heavenly Creatures. She's currently on Yellow Jackets, which is finished season 2 and will be doing a season 3. She plays Beth Bumstein, who is in love with the character of Sam Huntington's Jam, and they end up kind of getting together. It's really cute. I love them. We also have Natasha Lyonne as Christine, or what they the 4 guys call Stellas, and those are like girls who are obsessed with like disco, and they just kind of think are very vapid or whatever. We also have, which is funny, their friend, her friend, Christine's friend, Barbara, who's also in the car with them on their way when they get stuck behind the boys when they're driving. Is Emmanuelle Cherokee, who is from like Snow Day, and she's from Wrong Turn and all of that. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Also Canadian. This movie is very Canadian because there's some Canadian people in it. Shannon Tweed, who was also, I think, a partner to Mr. Gene Simmons. I think she still is with him, I guess. Of course, she's like kind of the erotic thriller queen in a way. She's been in a couple of different movies, but of course she was in this film because she has a relationship with Mr. Gene Simmons and has like children with him and stuff. So that's kind of interesting. And then we don't really have any other like crazy notable people. I mean, of course, like Kiss themselves are in this movie at the end of the movie. We also have Ron Jeremy as the MC of the place. It's Raining Men, which is like a male strip club. Where Shannon Tweed actually, I guess, propositions, quote unquote, the Edward Furlong character. And that's interesting. But you know, it's funny. Oh, also we have like Julian Richings is here somewhere. He's actually at the end, I believe, where he's one of the ticket takers, which is kind of fun. But I will say I was noticing one of the little kids in this, I was like, he sounds so familiar, right? And I was like, who is this kid? And so I ended up finding out that the little kid who is Chongo's little brother or whatever, the guy who's supposed to kick like Trip's ass or whatever in the convenience store, that is Cody Jones. And if you don't know this, it always comes back to Goosebumps on this show. Cody Jones is actually Noah Caldwell, who is Carly Beth's little brother from The Haunted Mask and The Haunted Mask 2. Get your little check. But yeah, I don't really know what else he's been in. I don't know if he's been in a ton of other things, but I think that's super cool. And I'm very happy for him to be getting that money, or he got that money at the time. But yeah, and it makes sense because, again, Canadian. So it makes total sense that he'd be in this. So that's a little bit about our cast and our crew and everything. You know, I think that's a good time. To talk a little bit about the production history of this film before we get into any plot information. So really the thing you need to know about is the fact that this movie in particular was obviously produced by Gene Simmons himself. And I think one of the production companies of this is like Kiss's production company, I think. Kiss Nation is literally one of the production companies, along with Base 12 Productions and Tacoma Entertainment Group. So it makes enough sense that this is supposed to be a Kiss movie. I think they had been trying to get it off the ground for a while, is what it seems like. And funny enough, too, Barry Levin, who I was just talking about a little bit ago, he was actually the photographer for Kiss and a lot of different acts from the 70s. He was a photographer for these people. which is cool. And he ended up getting into, I guess, film producing. He ended up getting into that. And so it was all kind of full circle for him. But the real big thing is that Carl Dupree, he worked with the editor of this movie, or one of them, Peter Schenck. He's a very, very big fan of Kiss. So is Tim Sullivan, who I think is the associate producer, if I'm not mistaken. And so all of these people really kind of came together, and Carl really wrote this script on spec, really. He ended up writing it. It didn't really go anywhere for a couple of years. And then Adam Rifkin ended up from, I think, one of the other producers, who is Kathleen Haas, I believe. She approached him and was like, hey, I'm involved in this thing called Detroit Rock City, and I was wondering if you maybe want to direct it. And Adam Rifkin had actually read it before, because he had worked with I guess Peter Schenck or somebody like that. He had worked with him before, or one of them, and they were like, oh, hey, here's this thing that we're working on. It's like this thing it's a Kiss movie, pretty much. And Adam himself is a big Kiss fan. So he was like, oh, that'd be dope to do. And when he gets the chance to like do this, he's like, I'll absolutely do it. So that made enough sense. And it's interesting because Kiss is obviously a big part of this movie, but they're not the focal point. They don't come in until the end. But what's interesting to me is that they do they've said it, like, even in the behind the scenes, they say that this movie is kind of a mix between something like Porky's, maybe, which maybe not, I don't know. I haven't seen Porky's, but they even said something about like, it's sort of like Fast Times at Ridgemont High meets The Wizard of Oz. And it's interesting how that kind of goes, because in a way, I don't know if it's the same as Fast Times. I don't know about that, but I do see the vision, though. Like, this is very much a teen movie, specifically, I guess, very much a teen boy movie, I guess. But also, it's fascinating to me that, like, yeah, that's how they kind of looked at this, and that's probably how they were thinking of it. Because really, and I think the big thing that, especially because Kiss is so enmeshed in this, is really that this was for fans by fans of this, and that was a huge thing for them, for this movie to really be able to take place and all of that. So I thought it was kind of interesting, and I think it's really cool that they were able to make something and have these people who, especially who were the older people in the movie, who were the crew and all that, they had folks who really were interested in them as a thing, and that could then give the chance to some of the younger people who maybe are only so familiar with Kiss to give them a better appreciation of it and all of that. So I don't really have much of like an opinion on Kiss, really. I know that they're super important in terms of just like, they just weren't doing things like people were doing in the 70s, you know what I mean? And that just is something where you have to kind of look at that and be like, well, if it wasn't for something like, Ozzy Osbourne and, that band that he was in, I don't ever remember what it's called, but Black Sabbath, if I'm not mistaken, or whatever he was in, come for me, Ozzy fans, I don't care. But there was that. But yeah, like, you just see people, or even like Alice Cooper, even though he's like transphobic apparently, and Gene Simmons, I don't know if he's like that great either, but whatever. They did have a whole reality show, remember that, y'all? They did really have a whole reality show, but I do think it's interesting, like, yeah, there is a level of, there's a respect that's paid to someone like Kiss, or to a band like Kiss, and it's fascinating to me, and that's what makes this interesting movie, if anything. So yeah. We're going to dive into this plot a little bit, though. So, this is 1978 Cleveland, Ohio, and four rebellious teenage boys, Hawk, who is played by Edward Furlong, Lex, who is Giuseppe Andrews, Trip, who is James DeBello, and then Jeremiah, or Jam, who is Sam Huntington. They play in a Kiss cover band called Mystery, and they prepare to see their idols in concert in Detroit, Michigan the following night. Their hopes are dashed when Jam's religiously conservative mother, played by Lynn Shay, finds their tickets and burns them before having Jam transferred to a Catholic boarding school. After Tripp manages to win tickets and backstage passes from a radio show in Detroit, the boys, with leader Hawk, disguised as a pizza delivery man, rescue Jam from the boarding school by drugging Father Philip McNulty, played by Joe Flaherty, using a pizza topped with hallucinogenic mushrooms before setting off for Detroit in Lex's mother's Volvo to collect the tickets. And en route, they get into a road rage incident with disco fanatics Kenny and Bobby after Tripp throws a slice of pizza on their windshield. And they beat up the disco duo and continue their journey before picking up Kenny's girlfriend, Christine, played by Natasha Lyonne, who has dumped him because of his behavior. Upon arriving in Detroit, the boys discover that Tripp did not stay on the phone long enough to actually get the tickets from the radio station. So when they exit the building, they find that the Volvo is missing, which they deduce that Christine stole it. And after arguing a little bit, they split up to try to find out how they can get Kiss tickets and also get the Volvo to then regroup in 105 minutes, which is funny. Hawk finds a scalper who suggests that he shakes his weenie and enters a male stripping contest to raise money for these tickets. So while he's in It's Raining Men, the male strip club, he gets drunk and he loses the contest after vomiting, but he is offered payment for the company and has sex with an older woman named Amanda Finch, played by Shannon Tweed. And after being paid, he locates the scalper only to discover that his tickets are sold out. So that's what he was doing. Tripp goes to a local convenience store hoping to mug a younger child for his tickets, who's played by Cody Jones. But the boy's older brother, Chongo, and his friends confront him and threaten him for $200. He then, Tripp then decides to plan to rob the store with a Stretch Armstrong doll that is disguised as a gun. However, he ends up getting $150 after he actually thwarts a genuine robbery attempt. And Tripp gives the money to Chongo's gang, and they assault him regardless, and they subsequently steal his wallet. So that's what happens to Tripp, and that's what happens to Hawk. Lex then sneaks backstage with the concert loading crew, but is caught and he is tossed over a fence where he tames a group of vicious dogs with a frisbee. And he then saves Christine and the Volvo from two car thieves who were actually responsible for stealing the car at a nearby chop shop. And Jam encounters his mom at an anti-Kiss rally, who forcibly takes his drumsticks before dragging him to a nearby church for confessional with a perverted priest who is more interested in salacious conversation rather than an actual confession. He is then greeted by Beth Bumstein, who's played by Melanie Linsky, a classmate of his who is moving to Ann Arbor. And after admitting their feelings for one another, they have sex before parting ways, agreeing to maintain contact with one another. And Jam, imbued by new confidence, he returns to the rally and he criticizes his mother's domineering ways and hypocrisy, telling her that her extreme religious views and controlling attitude have only caused him to despise religion and to rebel. And he ultimately breaks her spirit by labeling her as a lousy mom and proclaiming to her and the rally attendees that he has lost his virginity in a confessional booth, and he then demands his drumsticks back, one of which she has broken in half. And she does so and apologizes to him, remarking to the crowd, "They grow up so fast, don't they?" And then when the boys meet up empty-handed, Jam decides he suggests beating up everybody else to imply that they have gotten mugged for their tickets. So they beat each other up, and then upon their arrival at Cobo Hall, the guards initially doubt the boys' claims until Tripp actually points out Chongo's gang, who's inside, who are just entering as their assailants. And when the guards search them, they find Tripp's wallet they stole with his Kiss Army picture ID and money, and then they confiscate Chongo's tickets and give them to the boys before escorting him, his little brother, and his friends out of the concert. And then, shocked and delighted, the quartet enter the concert hall as Kiss plays the title theme song, which is Detroit Rock City. And as it ends, Peter Criss throws a drumstick, which Jam joyfully and excitedly catches. And then that's the end of Detroit Rock City. So it's a little bit about that plot, if anything. So yeah, I mean, in terms of some of these like friends, I guess, like they're very much so, like with Hawk, for example, like he's very much I mean, really, like all he kind of does is like you don't see as much of him really. the big thing is that he is so frightened to have to, shake his weenie, I guess. But then he ends up getting to have relations with an older woman and all that. And then I don't know, I can't really kind of pinpoint what I think of his character, to be honest. It's one of these things where I'm like, he doesn't go through like a big crazy arc that I can think of, really. But with Trip, though, which is interesting to me, is that he starts off as kind of like an idiot, right? Like a little bit. He does kind of start off that way. But what's interesting about him is that he decides like, okay, I'm going to like, I guess, rob this convenience store because I need to get money. But then he decides like, okay, I guess I'm going to just like do this and I'm going to like whatever. And then he ends up getting to thwart the actual like robbery attempt, and he's able to like kiss and make out with like the girl behind the desk or whatever of the convenience store. And it's interesting because he is so trying to like get this kid on his side to be like, hey, look, like you should give me these things and whatever, or you should give me your tickets and all that. And he's just trying not to get his ass beat. But what's interesting is that he does get his ass beat. But then what's funny is that at the end of it all, he is the reason why they're able to get into the concert, because it just so happens that he did have a, confrontation earlier with these guys who he identifies. And then that's just interesting how that all kind of ties back, if you will. In terms of Lex, you see him like, again, there's only so much to kind of go off with him. I mean, obviously, like, when it comes down to him, his story definitely comes into like, he gets kind of the furthest in with the concert, which is interesting. But then it's kind of interesting and fun because like then he ends up getting to save somebody who he kind of wasn't even really fucking with in the first place, honestly. Because him and Christine weren't really that like, when even like she was like in the car and all that, it wasn't really anything like too yeah, they weren't getting along or anything. So it's interesting how he's able to come and like save her, which is interesting. And it's cool. Cause she was also, I mean, Christine was like about her shit though. She was trying to also kind of, even though she was tied up, and those guys who were going to go do God knows what to her. But I also think like she was trying to hold her own in a way as much as she could, I guess. But yeah, I do think that that's interesting, but I really think the guy who has the most here, in my opinion, is Jam, especially since, obviously Jam's mom is the one who like burns the original tickets. And then also like, he has like the biggest arc to me, and I really like it. I think Sam Huntington does a really good job at it. And I really like the fact that he does, if anything, call out his mother for how she's acting, because she is just being like, reductive and conservative, and she thinks this thing he's interested in is so horrible. And as we may already well know, when it comes to music and stuff like that, like music does not make kids do terrible, horrible things. Violence in the media and in movies and stuff doesn't necessarily make somebody want to go out and kill people. Do you know what I mean? And so like, it's these things of trying to just, I think he has a point, and I liked his little speech when he tells her, he's not necessarily nice about it, but he's honest about it. And he says, look, this is just making me rebel against you, and you're being a lousy mom. And maybe very well she is, you know what I mean? And that's just how it is. She thinks she's protecting him, but when really she's pushing him away from her. And I just think that's it's fascinating. And I think he has the biggest arc to me, and I really do. I tended to like his character. And again, this is kind of this interesting ensemble piece. Again, I think Hawk has the least to do in a way. But I think like, with Trip and Lex, I think Trip and Jam probably have a lot to do. And then Lex and Hawk, they only have so much to do. But it is what it is. And I do think that these four friends do feel pretty, cohesive with one another, and it is supposed to be all about them, really. So yeah, I mean, some of the key plot points obviously are their journey to go and see Kiss in concert in Detroit, and some of the challenges that they do face along the way. So obviously there's parental opposition, because I've already kind of touched on that, but the fact that especially Jam's mother is so against like the music of Kiss, which was a real thing. It was with that and Alice Cooper and all sorts of musical acts, especially even into the 80s, especially. And especially the 80s, it was like let by the government that it was okay to do this. It was encouraged in a way. And it's just something that's just so odd to me. And I just think like you shouldn't necessarily have to censor art like this in a way, because there's a reason for it. And I really do think like I talked about it when I talked about the Haunted Mask last year, but I remember talking about that, is that, banning anything like books or movies or whatever, it just makes kids want things more, and I'm not a parent, nor do I work with children or whatever, but just in common sense, definition, when you have something that a kid may like that, you may not agree with for whatever reasons, but it is something that is technically age appropriate for them. It's just something that maybe you don't like because you think, oh no, horror is trash, or oh no, Harry Potter is trash, even though yes, obviously J.K. Rowling is trash, but it's just one of these things where I don't know. It's just, I get the opposition, and I understand being able to like, in a way, like, you have to parent your kid and not let them watch every single thing in the world, because some things should not be watched by children. But I also think like, if your kid is mature and they understand that this is all just like fantasy and it's all like not real, and movies are not real and none of this stuff is real, and if anything, it's storytelling, I think that's just something that, is cool to have. And it can also make a kid interested in that kind of a thing, which hopefully will just make them more creative and be able to help solve problems better and all that good stuff. But yeah, that's one of the big challenges they face. But then they also, they also face like some car trouble, because they go into the big city of Detroit and they get their car stolen. Oops, that happened. And like, every which way, it's like these things of like, that just gets in their way of being able to get what they want, you know what I mean? Which I thought was just kind of interesting. In terms of any sort of like themes or motifs throughout this film or anything, I definitely think like one of the big things I think this movie is definitely touching upon is just the coming of age experience. All of these kids feel fairly age appropriate to me. I don't remember all their ages or anything, but I mean, they were probably late teens, like into their early 20s. Especially since some of them just look very young. But the thing with this is it is very much coming of age, because it's important when you are a teen and you're growing up, when you're able to do something like go to a concert with like your friends, and like you're able to have the little bit of level independence that you can get. And I think just portraying the teenage experience and just growing up, I think that's a really big part of this. And it does feel like, I mean, this is very much like a teen boy film. But it does feel very authentic in a way. Now, do I love technically the use of like the F slur in this a bunch? Like, again, as you may already well know, if you watch this show or you listen to the show, I don't mind the F slur being used, I don't really tend to care a lot of the time, but it's also one of those things where in this I was kind of like, oh wait, why are they using this a bunch? Like, what the hell? But really, I mean, when it comes down to it, if this is a period piece in 78, like that was being used, people definitely called Kiss the F slurs, you know what I mean? Like, so it's not even something where I'm like mad about it. It's literally just like, no, this feels like what teen boys would say. So, I mean, I guess I was a teen boy at some point. So, I mean, like, fair enough, it makes sense. But yeah, I do think like just as a teen film, though, this does tend to capture a level of that teen experience and just the level of growing up and having the independence of like rebelling and going to something that maybe you're not supposed to, which is cool. And that kind of then ties into just another theme that I can find, which is rebellion and freedom, which is a big part of it, because you're really rebelling against authority in this. The authority being like, I guess you could say like Elvis, who is the the school guard at their school. It starts out there, but then also you're fighting against the parent authority, who is Lin Shaye in this movie. But I definitely tend to see that, and I think if anything, like that was a big part of and it is a big part of teen cinema, especially, is that there is this level of rebellion that happens. And you can look at a lot of different movies that are targeted to teens. You could see that there are sometimes there's this push and pull of like rebelling and also being able to have some freedom, because it really all comes down to, especially when you are young or when you're a kid or you're a young, you're a teenager, I feel like what happens is you feel like you can't wait to grow up and you can't wait to be able to try to be more independent. Right. And it's all that. And don't get me wrong, it's great to be independent and it's great to do all that, but there is a level of responsibility that comes with that. And, I think being able to kind of look into the freedom that you have, and being able to kind of just appreciate that. And I think if anything, like, I just feel like an old lady at this point now, but like, it's one of these things where being able to talk about, like, enjoy your childhood, enjoy your freedom that you get as a teenager, before it all goes away. And I think that's really interesting because these characters are very much like 16, 17 years old probably. And it's just very interesting how that kind of all comes together. And rebellion and freedom, I think, are a big part of this, because they're rebelling by stealing one of the mom's cars and like driving it to Detroit, which is a whole other state away, but also just like getting to go to a concert of your like favorite band. It's so cool. And being able to do it with your friends, like, you get to do that. And I think that's a big part of this. And then also, too, as well, like finding somebody who you didn't even realize like likes you, but then you find out you also like her, and then you're able to like have this intimate moment in like a confessional booth, which is interesting. But I just thought that was kind of I don't know, rebellion and freedom, that's definitely a big part of this movie, and I think it's captured really, really well in a way. It feels that way. And I think also another theme in this is just the idea of friendship and loyalty. So there is this level of friendship between these characters. As I stated already, there is this ensemble piece going on, and they are just they are here for each other. There's no particular infighting necessarily until they actually fight each other, I guess. But it's interesting because, there is this level of friendship is there, and, they decide to break apart and they go about trying to get these tickets because all they want to do is just go see Kiss, and they just want to experience this together as friends, but they have to experience stuff separately in order to then come back together and experience this together. So, friendship and loyalty is a big part of this, and being able to make new friends along the way, whether it be with, Beth, obviously, who is, and it's funny because Beth and Christine are also like songs from Kiss, so that's very intentional. But Beth, who's Melanie Linsky, she is also able to tell Jeremiah how she feels about him. And then Christine is getting to be, in a way, saved by Lex, but also is but it's nice because she gets to have somebody actually literally save her from a situation that could have not turned out well. So it's cool, but they also, it ties that up in a way, which is nice. I guess she did end up going to Disco Inferno, in after all, I guess. But I definitely think those are some big themes that are kind of explained throughout the movie or explored throughout the movie, if anything. I think Kiss in the soundtrack of this movie, so obviously Kiss is a big part of this movie in general. It's the whole reason for it. But their influence on the soundtrack is I mean, obviously there's just so much like playing throughout this, which is cool. And this is a good little soundtrack, honestly. I mean, they have everything from like The Boys Are Back in Town, which is covered by Thin Lizzy. It's actually performed by Everclear, which is fun. But they have other things like Black Sabbath. It is Ozzy Osbourne. There you go. But they have that. Cheap Trick is in here a little bit. They have the Donnas do Strutter, which is a cover of Kiss. They have the Runaways in here a little bit, which is really fun. But yeah, I really do like the music throughout this, and I think it's a good time. And of course you have this ending with like Detroit Rock City as part of the concert that they go to. But yeah, this is a huge part of that, and it's just it's a big part of the movie, obviously, and I think it just influences how it feels. And it does kind of feel like, in a way, 1978, even though there are some modern people in it a little bit when they're doing covers. But ultimately, that's fine because, it's melding the two in a way, which is kind of cool. But yeah, I think any sort of like key songs to point out, the big ones for me are obviously like Detroit Rock City, which ends the movie. That's kind of a good one. And also I always love hearing a Rebel Rebel. I always like hearing that. David Bowie, it's also in here a little bit. You have that. They also did not use the movie. They didn't use the song Beth or anything, which is kind of sad. But they also have like Highway to Hell, which is performed Marilyn Manson. Not fun, but tis what it is. It was 1999 after all. We also have Cat Scratch Fever in here somewhere, which is done by Pantera, which is fun. And then Running with the Devil was another one I liked as well. That's always a good time. And it was done by Van Halen, so that was a good time. And then, of course, like Shout It Out Loud, like that was a good one as well. So there was some good songs up in here, I must say. But I think the impact of the soundtrack on the film, I mean, it really just, like, this is the Kiss movie, man. Like, honestly, if you love you some Spice Girls, you're gonna go watch Spice World. If you love you some Kiss, you better be watching Detroit Rock City. Come on. But it really does like kind of enhance like the atmosphere because it feels like a period piece. It feels like this is, what's funny? I was thinking about this when I was watching the movie, is that it's different and it came out the same year. But, this movie, along with the font that begins the movie a little bit, it gives me a little bit of Dick vibes with Kirsten Dunst and Michelle Williams, because it is set in the 70s and that's all fine and well. So it is set in the 70s, which is, all fine and well and everything. But yeah, I did kind of think of that when I was watching this. I was like, this does give me a little bit of like Dick vibes, honestly. Like I'm not mad at that. I love that movie, as if you listen, you very well may know. But I think that it kind of makes sense, and in a weirder world, I guess, because this is an R-rated movie. Although I did find out, at least from IMDb trivia, so take it with a grain of salt, but in this movie, it was supposed to maybe be cut down to PG-13, and obviously if they ever showed it on TV or whatever, like it was going to be cut down, but they decided against that, which is good, because if this was going to be PG-13, girl, it was not going to work, in my opinion. But yeah, so you have that. I think just like the critical response of this movie, or the critical reception of this movie, again, I think fans tended to really come in and love the film and have really championed it in a way, which is all fine and well. But if we look at some of these reviews, I guess, so some of the reviews we have, so even even the critical census or the critic consensus is like a silly plot. It's over the top style of directing. I mean, well, it's supposed to kind of be. I think that's kind of the point of the movie in a way. I mean, Adam Rifkin, if anything, he does have a bit of an over-the-top style, so from what it seems like. And so I think really the critical response was something where it was just mixed by at least like the audience, but I think just... Or at least by the critics, but like I think audiences just took this movie and they seem to really enjoy it for what it's doing. And I also think like in general, like I guess the way of this like cult following it has, I mean, it makes a total sense that it would, because I don't think this movie was made for everybody. This movie was very much made for like the fans of Kiss, and maybe there weren't, I think there were a bunch probably in 1999, but it's also one of those things where, you know, when you have something that is like an R-rated movie, you're going to have like the R-rated audience go out for it. You're not going to have teens that can go into the movie necessarily. So if that's what you wanted, but I also don't think this movie would have maybe worked as well, as I just said, if it was to have been cut down to PG-13. I just don't think it would have really done very well. It didn't do well in general anyway, but I think it would have just suffered, which is at least good that they kept it the way it was. Apparently it was supposed to be it was going to be a 3-hour long movie, or at least the original cut was 3 hours long, probably because they just kept wanting to do things because, again, a lot of the people involved in the production of this were big Kiss fans. So of course they were trying to do something with that. But yeah, I mean, I totally understand how this movie would have gained a cult following over the time, you know, especially at the time. Or the reason I think it came out was because of the whole thing of Kiss getting back together and doing like reunion tours and stuff. And there was this like re-energized interest, I guess. And even that kind of went into the 2000s a little bit, not anything too crazy, but, you know, seeing them parodied a little bit on something like Family Guy, or even like having literally the Growing Up Simmons or whatever, where Gene Simmons had his own reality show with his like wife and children. So that's the whole thing as well. But you know, it makes sense that like you would do something like Detroit Rock City to kind of capitalize on what they were doing anyway. And I think just its impact on like the fans of Kiss. I mean, they had like 3,000 extras come out for a fake concert kind of with Kiss for the movie, and you had people come out and like into it. So that's really cool. And I think if anything, like this has that cult following similar to something like the movie Dick has a little bit, but even something where a little bit of like Dazed and Confused as well, where it's like this interesting little time capsule of what we think the 70s were like and how we feel about it. And I think that also kind of helps with its cult impact, if you will, because this is a movie that I guess if you're just a casual fan of rock and roll, you could maybe pick into and get into. But yeah, I mean, again, I'm not the hugest on like Kiss. I'm not like a giant Kiss fan or whatever, but I understand the appeal of the movie, and I do think that there is something to it for sure. In terms of any sort of thing of like my personal reflections of the movie, as I kind of already have stated about, I think what I really liked about it personally, in my view, was really the fact of like, I did like the boys generally. It took me a little bit of time to like really like them, but I really ended up liking them together as like a unit. But I really ended up loving Jam a lot. Like I thought he was really good. And I did like that. And I liked their little like going off their separate ways for a little bit. And I thought that was a really interesting thing to do within this film, because like, yeah, it's supposed to be about Kiss, I guess, but it's a little bit more than just that. And I liked, you know, being able to see Jam's arc through the movie, you know, him getting sent to boarding school, but then also him getting to like lose his virginity to a girl that likes him and he likes, and, you know, also like getting to tell his mom off, because it kind of gives you that like teenage energy that you know is there and all that. So I thought that was really cool. That's what I really loved about it, is just like I did enjoy that part and those parts of it. I tended to like, I think it was that and Trip. I ended up liking Trip a little bit more as characters. Him and Jam really did something for me, where I just really enjoyed them in a way. Probably Jam more, but you know, Trip was fine, I guess. In terms of any sort of criticism, I think this movie is just fine the way it is generally. The criticisms I have for it, or do I feel like it holds up today a little bit? I mean, the use of the F slur in this movie is, there's like a bit of it. And again, I'm not like precious about it necessarily, but I did feel like I was just like, oh my God, Jesus Christ. But, you know, who am I to say? And also there is a little bit of just like, they do use like the M slur for a little person near the end, and also there is some little bit of appropriation when it comes to like Native American culture when they go to the It's Raining Men little bar, little strip bar, and you know, there's some things there that, you know, maybe would be like, huh, okay, well, I wonder if they would do that again. But overall, like generally, if you're looking at it as just like a period piece from the 70s, those things maybe don't hold up the most necessarily, but I'm not going to like hold it against the movie necessarily. But I think my only criticism is that I wish I kind of liked the boys right off the bat, I guess, if we're going to do that. But I did end up warming up to them in a way, which was kind of cool. I also think my other criticism would just be more Melanie Linsky, but that's just me personally, because I can always get more into her personally. But yeah, no, I think like in general, if to try to wrap this up a little bit, I really do think like this movie in particular, like it does have this kind of cult following to it. This did not do well financially at all for New Line Cinema, which was a little bit of the issue it was having in general, that film studio. But I do think like I'm happy that a movie like this that is so much for the fans and so much made for the fans by the fans, it was able to even get out there. Cool for Kiss being able to do that, you know. I mean, they obviously tapped into a market that, you know, was there that they wanted to tap into. And I really do think like these four guys who did this in a weird way, in an interesting way. And I think, you know, there's no coincidence to it that, you know, the four guys in the movie in a way kind of mirror the four guys from the band, really, in an interesting way. Not really sure who is who necessarily, but I don't think it's any surprise that that's a thing either, which makes total sense to me. But yeah, I just think like it's cool that they were able to finally get this off the ground, and you had people behind it who are interested in the music and interested in what Kiss had to stand for. And I think that's really awesome. And, you know, again, maybe some of the people in Kiss are probably a little problematic. I mean, they're, you know, older white man. So, I mean, yeah, I get it. But, you know, you always have to kind of be aware of like, like, I wonder if they said anything that weird or whatever. Especially when you're getting up in the age like that. But it's cool that they at least made a movie, and, you know, I can't hold that against them. You know, I mean, I tend to kind of ironically enjoy something like Spice World, even though it's like kind of a bad movie. But I mean, you know, but I love it for what it is because I love the Spice Girls and I had that kind of a thing. So if somebody wants to feel that way about Kiss and they feel that way about this movie and they just unironically love it, then awesome. I think it is something to behold, and it's something that I think it's a fun time to watch for sure. And I think I would recommend it for anything. If you want a teen boy movie, you want a quick 90 minutes, you know, it's on Hoopla right now. I think it makes the rounds every so often where you can like probably find it on Prime every so often or wherever else. But yeah, definitely pull up on it. I'd be down for that. So yeah, definitely. But I think that brings a wrap to the show today and talking about Detroit Rock City. So again, this is celebrating 25 years. So happy birthday, Detroit Rock City. But yeah, so as we normally do in the show, if you would like to follow the show on social media, you can do so on Instagram at Cult Cinema Circle, or if you'd like to follow the show on social media, you can do so on Instagram. If you would like to follow the show on social media, you can do so on Instagram at Cult Cinema Circle, and on Twitter, I'm at Cult Cine Circle, and on Letterboxd, I'm at Jesse, Jesse, Kremp, Kremp, all one word, where you can see movies I'm watching and all that good fun stuff. And yeah, email me at cultcinemacircle@gmail.com if you want to give feedback on the show, be a guest on the show, give me movie recommendations, whatever you want to do. It's all good. And yeah, and then for next week's episode, we're going to go a little bit back into the 90s, and we're going to do a little movie that I have never seen before, but it is currently on Disney Plus, and it is also celebrating a 30-year anniversary, actually, which is fun. And I also am going to have a guest next week who's going to talk to this movie about. But we're doing Camp Nowhere from 1994. This is a Christopher Lloyd movie. It also has a bunch of young actors from it. And yeah, it's about these kids who, they go to a camp, and it's not actually a camp, but they try to make it so that their parents are none none the wiser. And so they can have a level of freedom, kind of going back into the whole idea of trying to have that freedom, trying to have that. And so, yeah, we're doing a lot of, if anything, we're doing some like teen movie fare, but also like we're doing some music stuff too, because after that, near the end of the month, I'm doing a little movie. That's a good time. So yeah, it's also going to be a little bit of a musical movie, if you will. So, you know, tell me what you think it's going to be. But but yeah, and we're going a little bit way back for that, so that'll be a good time. But yeah. As always, thank you for taking the time to listen to the Cult Cinema Circle podcast. And remember, I want to rock and roll all night and party every day. Take care. Bye.